is there bad glare on this?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's all right.
But,
Yeah, there you go.
that helps some. Wanted to talk about the third occupation of Jacksonville. I don't know if y'all know it, there was 4 different occupations. The last one was a permanent occupation. But the third one always kind of interests me a little bit, just because of this. But on the 10th of March, 8 a.m. in the morning, 5 steamers show up, 2 gunboats and 3 transports show up in the river. They dock at the wharf, immediately offload troops. They run their troops out and they surround the town. I mean, just lickety-split. It was a very good, on their part, occupation. These were black troops. This was right after the Emancipation Proclamation. Did I say this was March of the 10th of 1863? Probably didn't say that. But they were here to raise recruits for their regiments, but to go out into the countryside and bring, free slaves. They were able, like I say, to take the town without any trouble. And there were some mounted Confederate pickets that Colonel Montgomery and the 2nd South Carolina had a run-in with, and they were 2 wounded Union soldiers and 1 KIA Union soldier. Don't know about any Confederate casualties at all. They occupied the town. The Confederate pickets reported back to Camp Finnegan. They telegraphed to Lake City, let General Finnegan know what was going on. They spent that day just occupying the town, getting their troops offloaded, and building a perimeter of sorts around the town. On the 11th, General Finnegan arrived by train late that night, early the next morning. He probably only has 300, 350 men in the Jacksonville area at the most. The black units number about 800 to 900 men. There is some skirmishing that takes place in the area of the brick church. That was a pretty much normal picket line for the Confederates, was the brick church. Those not familiar with the brick church, it's Myrtle Avenue and Church Street is pretty much where the brick church was. And the brickyard was there in that area. They, Union forces tried to advance out. They couldn't get out. There were several pickets killed on the Union side, and during that skirmish that morning on the 11th, and Dr. Meredith of the 2nd Florida Cavalry was killed, a surgeon for the 2nd Florida Cavalry. Those were the only casualties of that day. Now the Union troops, to try and impress the Confederates, were also busy setting up tents that they didn't have any people for, to try and make it look like there were more people here than was here. Their numbers were too small. They didn't have enough men to get out and get past the Confederates, even though the Confederates were only 300 or so strong. Now Finnegan, first thing he has done when he hears about the landing, has telegraphed to Charleston to look for reinforcements, and to the Middle District of Florida. General Cobb's out in the Middle District. He's looking for reinforcements. He's also called in everybody that he has, the troops from down in Palatka, some of those down at Clay Landing, and some of the other areas close to the Gulf. He has pulled in to try and defend Jacksonville. He also, General Finnegan, puts out a call to all the civilians in the area to arm themselves and help with the fight, trying to raise some troops, because they just short-handed. Like I say, just some light skirmishing on the 12th. No casualties reported. On the 14th, the Union is busy just fortifying town. They don't send out any forces out to try and get past the Confederates. They cut down all the live oaks on the edge of town. All the limbs are facing out. They burn all the houses on the perimeter of town on either side of the railroad to make an open field of fire. And basically spent their time working on defenses. On the 16th, nothing happens on the 15th. On the 16th, Union forces try again to come out in force, and pretty much run into heavy skirmishers at the Brickyard. Now, Major Bavard and his 2nd Florida Battalion are in the woods. Basically, they're at Haddock's house, which is on Dennis Street between Stockton and Myrtle, for modern day area. His troops are hid in the woods. They're hoping that the skirmishers can fall back and then Union forces will chase them and they can flank them. But the Union forces do not advance beyond the brick church. Kind of the same scenario goes on for days, and nothing really happens. It's about this time that the Confederates moved from Camp Finnegan and established Camp Mooney out on the west side of town. This is how Camp Mooney got its name. It's named for George Mooney, who was the property owner. George Mooney had a foundry and a shipyard there in Jacksonville, and was actually building a gunboat at the beginning of the war. And this is property that he owns where Camp Mooney is established. This is also probably the site of an early war camp called Camp Strange, named after, I think it was Lieutenant Strange, the first Confederate casualty here in Jacksonville. By moving their camp from Finnegan to Mooney, they cut off 2 miles of march time, so that if the Union forces get past their pickets, they still can catch them before they get out to the open countryside. On the, what did I say, 16th, they also, when they advanced out, the Union forces advanced out that morning, they had a 10-pound parrot mounted on a flat car, a railroad flat car. They were pushing and pulling along to shoot at the Confederates. The reason the Confederates don't really want to go beyond the Brickyard and the brick church is because then the Union gunboats come into play. Instead of where they burn all the houses down, that was to make an open field of fire for the gunboats in the bend of the river there to be able to shell the west side of town. Any Confederate forces that move in mass are open to Union gunboats. On the March the 17th, the same thing again, skirmishing again. This time Bavard claims he has 6 men wounded. One of the few times where he admits to having men wounded. No Union forces admit to any losses that day. Like I say, it rocks on the same for every day, just a light skirmishing. On March the 20th, the Union forces send out women and children that want to get out of Jacksonville, send them out through the lines. And the Confederates pick them up in wagons and haul them back towards Camp Finnegan. Also on the 20th, the 6th Connecticut starts to arrive. This is reinforcements, so maybe that these troops can break out into the countryside. 6th Connecticut is a white unit. They also finished their 2 redoubts on the outskirts of Jacksonville, pretty much on Jefferson Avenue area, on either side of the railroad track. One's called for Colonel Higginson, who's in charge of the 1st South Carolina Regiment, and the other redoubt is for Fort Montgomery for Colonel Montgomery, who's the 2nd South Carolina commander. These will later on become Union lines during the '64 occupation. They will extend these lines out and reinforce them a considerable amount. On March the 25th, well, I lost a day here. On March the 24th, Colonel Clinch's cavalry arrives as reinforcements. A large gun comes from the Central District of Florida, a rifle and banded 32-pounder. That's a 6.4-inch gun. Lieutenant Buckman, the ordnance officer of Lake City, is put in charge of this, and they decide just to leave it on the railroad car, lash it down, and use it as a mobile artillery piece. They Also arriving at that time period is Gamble's battery, another light battery, to help the Confederates. On the 21st and 22nd of March, the 8th Maine arrives, and that completes the reinforcements. Now the Union forces, instead of 800 or 900, up to close to 1,600, 1,700 men. They hope to have enough men now to be able to go out into the countryside and start building their ranks in these black regiments. On the 23rd, we have a big incident. It's called the Battle of the Clothesline. This is named by the Yankees. That morning early, a Union scout comes in and claims to have found the Confederate camp just outside of town. Within an hour's time, Colonel Higginson has rounded up over 200 men, and they're on the march to attack the Confederate camp. When just short of the clearing, he divides his command into two columns, and on the given signal, they charge the camp with fixed bayonets. And what a beautiful charge it was. Only to find out when they break into the clearing, it's wash hanging on a clothesline and not tents. All had a good laugh except for the Union scout. But they were not to be denied. That family had a mule, and they took their mule. So they did take a prisoner that day. On the night of March the 24th, Lieutenant Buckman and some men from the 1st South Carolina, not 1st South Carolina, the 1st Florida Regulars, mount their gun on the platform car and get the locomotive to push them to within 1.5 miles of Jacksonville. This is right in the area just past the brick church. There's a curve in the railroad tracks, and if you follow the curve in the railroad tracks, it'll line them dead up for shooting downtown Jacksonville. They fire off 7 rounds from this 6.4-inch gun into downtown Jacksonville, where the Union headquarters are at, before the gunboat starts to shoot back at them. Francis Solly was on that gun crew. He wrote a little article about it. Said as soon as them Union gunboats started getting range on them, they signaled for the locomotive to come get them, and they got out of there. No sense staying around and getting shot up. Well, the Yankees didn't like that, so the next morning they really come out and forced the 8th Maine, 6th Connecticut, and the black troops. The black troops are pushing and pulling this 10-pound Parrott down the railroad tracks. The 8th Maine is marching on the plank road, and the 6th Connecticut is to the south of the railroad tracks, and they're marching out in force. Their goal is to make it the 3-mile run and tear up the trestle so that gun can't get close to town again. Now, 3-mile run is between Macduff Avenue and Stockton Street today. You can't hardly see it if you're driving down Beaver Street, but if you get off a couple of blocks, you can see there's a creek that runs through there. It's called 3-mile run because it's 3 miles out on the railroad. Confederate pickets warned the Confederates at Camp Mooney that what's going on, and they come out with their railroad car. And that is what this painting is about. They start shelling the Union troops and that are marching down the road. I want to read 2 different accounts. See if I can without glasses. I printed it big, but it don't look like it's big enough. Huh? Well, I think I can read it. This is the Union account, and this is the Captain MacArthur talking about what had happened. He said the shell struck in the middle of the tracks, and a large chunk of shell cut through the ranks of the 8th Maine. It struck the musket barrel of Thomas Holt, taking off his head. Passing to the next rank, it took off the shoulder of Joseph Godwin. He lived 2 hours. Passing to the next rank, it took off the leg below the knee of another man. I soon had the ambulances at work, hiding the pieces of shell under the plank road, turning over all the planks that had blood on them, and scattering over the spot, soil over the spot. We quickly obliterated all signs of anyone being hurt. We got back to town at 3 o'clock. Now that's his account. I think this is Major Bavard's account. I continued to throw shells into their columns for some distances on their retreat and found evidence of considerable loss on their part. A number of guns, caps, haversacks, canteens, and fragments of human bodies, portions of skulls were found on the road occupied by their columns. So somebody's not telling the same story. But those were the only casualties that day. It was kind of a long distance fight. It was all artillery. The 10-pound Parrott was answering the Confederate gun, but inflicted no casualties. Artillery pieces, ever, for sure, in the Civil War. On March the 26th, the next day, the steamer Governor Megas, or no, it's General Megas, with Colonel Montgomery's 2nd South Carolina, head up the river. They're going to go plunder some plantations along the way, see if they can get some cotton. There's always an interest of the Union forces to try and see how much cotton they could gather. They spend the day going down, or I guess you call that up the river. Then, but on the morning, they anchor across from Palatka, spend the night, and then early the next morning, they steam over to the wharf there at Palatka. Unbeknownst to them, Captain Dixon had saw them the night before, was laying in wait, and had his men hiding in ambush there at the wharf. They sent a local man off the steamer onto the wharf and down into town. He come back and said the coast was clear. So they started unloading people off the boat. That's about a half a dozen to a dozen of them got off the boat. Dixon opens up on them. There's a Lieutenant Colonel Billings that's with this regiment. He's shot 3 times. Another member of the Black Regiment is shot and killed. They immediately load up. The steamer starts backing away from the wharf, and they leave. According to Montgomery, though, it's the other way around, that they drive off the Confederates and load up all the cotton. I think he's full of baloney, because they didn't stay. When they get back to Jacksonville, they find out that that evening that Union forces are being withdrawn. So on the 29th of March, all the Union forces are withdrawn out of Jacksonville. The 6th Connecticut is the rear guard, and they're in town. Somehow, town catches fire. The black troops blame the white troops. The white troops blame the black troops. Pretty sure it's the 6th Connecticut that set fire to town. The correspondent for the Philadelphia Inquirer said he's on the Boston steamer Boston. Says he can see the flames already above the rooftops that they'd set the town on fire. And so on fire as they're leaving. Now, Confederates dash into town, and General Finnegan actually takes credit for putting the fires out. But another, one of the men states that there was a very heavy rainstorm that was considerable help in retarding the advance of the fire. It burned about 6 square blocks of town before they got it out. And that ended the 3rd occupation of Jacksonville. The first 2 occupations were not as long as this one. They were probably 10 days in duration. This one went from the 10th to the 29th, so we had 19, almost 3 weeks of occupation. Colonel Higginson, on the 24th, 25th, somewhere in there, stated that he managed to round up 70 contraband. That's what they call blacks, was contraband. For trying to refill his ranks, I don't think they did very well at all. If he only had 70. He might have had some more by the 29th, and he only had another 4 or 5 days. So as far as the Union forces are concerned, or their objective was to fill their ranks, I think their expenditure in time and money and lives was a waste. Confederates didn't really benefit or do anything other than they never held the town after the first occupation. They always stayed out in the western part of town. And after this, they abandoned Camp Mooney and moved back to Camp Finnegan. And that's the entire useful life of Camp Mooney as far as I can see. I don't know if any of you have ever read the granite marker out there at cemetery, at Mooney Cemetery. That's a bunch of baloney about the Louisiana militia being surrounded and attacked by Yankees there on the 19th or the 1st of March of 1864. None of that ever happened. That got I-10 moved though. Well, anybody got any questions?
You mentioned Plank Road, and what? Where is that in with the gunship? I mean, the guns there on the train.
In town there?
Yeah.
That's pretty much between Macduff and Stockton Street.
And that's what it's called. Plank. That's not Old Plank Road, though, is it?
Beaver Street is the old Plank Road till you get out to Hart's. There on the west side of Jacksonville, there's a little piece of it before 295 where the old plank cuts off to get around Cracker Swamp.
Right.
And that's the old Plank Road. But there's a little store on that point right there. And that's where, but Beaver Street is the old Plank Road all the way out. Even in that Myrtle Avenue area where it's got that bend in it, you can see it on the map.
So then, Old Plank Road then really didn't exist out there on Beaver Street. It actually went around the store, and where Old Plank Road is today, is that?
That is the old Plank Road. Now, it only went out to McGurk's Creek. The Plank Road went bankrupt. It was a toll road. You had to pay a toll to go on that road. And the railroad came along, I mean, right after they started the Plank Road, they started building the railroad, and the railroad killed the toll road. But it was an all-weather road, though. I mean, they took trees and split them in half, turned the flat sides up, so you didn't have no mud holes or anything to travel over. And that guy talking about turning the planks over, I don't see how you turn a rounded bottom tree over and hide something. But yes, the Plank Road run all the way there into probably about 95 area where it gets chopped off from what it was in that time period. Calvin?
The 7 shots they fired into town, did they hit anything?
A couple of them didn't blow up. One of them went through a house where some people were sleeping at and kind of rousted them out of bed. But no, they caused no casualties other than it infuriated the Union commander there, Colonel Higginson, that they were able to get up there and shoot at him.
I wonder why they didn't shoot at the gunboats.
Didn't have enough range. They were on a railroad track. You got to take that into consideration. It never turned enough for them to be able to shoot down at their gunboats. They were kind of up in the bend of the river there, where the YMCA is and Seaboard, or not the CSX Railroad building. They were in that bend of the river. They could shoot to the west side of town. That Rifle and Bandit 32 pounder probably had that was probably maximum range for them at that 1.5 miles out of Jacksonville to shoot downtown. But they couldn't get lined up, and they couldn't move it around on that flat car because it was lashed down.
Is that gun involved in O'Lusty?
No, that's a different gun at O'Lusty. That was a Rifle and Bandit 12 pounder at O'Lusty. That's a 4.6-inch gun.
Did it say what happened to that gun? Whatever happened to it?
No, it went back to Cobb over there in Middle Florida when this emergency passed. But have no idea what happened to it.
You said that there was a man building a gunboat for the Confederates when the war started here in Jacksonville?
Yes.
Whatever happened to that?
It got burnt.
Oh.
On the first occupation of Jacksonville, they hadn't even put the steam engine in it yet. And they set it on fire and burned it. It was just a wooden, 150-foot long wooden boat.
Oh, okay.
It was more like a river boat. It would only had 2 guns on it too. But
Not ironclad?
no, it wasn't ironclad.
Wasn't that the one they gave them plans for them boats out to several people, didn't they?
Right. Yeah, there was. Here's a plan if you want to build one.
Didn't they finish 1 or 2 of them though? I think they did finish.
I think they finished one of them. I couldn't tell you where it's at or where it was at.
I know he made the money. Mooney made the money, says Jacksonville gunboat money.
Yeah, I have one of those I should have brought one of those bonds. I have one of those gunboat bonds. 50-cent bonds.
Wow.
They were selling to raise money for gunboat. I don't know that he made any money. He sold those bonds. He probably had all of it put into that boat.
He's buried out there, we think, in the Catholic cemetery. We never could prove it though, because
No, we can't prove it. I don't know how we'll prove that. I'd like to prove it.
yeah, we got him a headstone. We never could prove he was there.
Yeah, he was, he went around collecting scrap metal and stuff for the Columbus Naval Yard there in Columbus, Georgia. And ended up being that militia unit or home guard unit there. But he died in 72, here in town. And his wife lived here to like 93, 95, something like that when she died. And she's buried out there, I know. And I just got a bet that he's buried next to where she's buried at.
Where did you happen upon the picture?
I had an artist do it.
Oh, okay.
That's a photocopy of the painting that we had done. Artist has passed away that did it. That's when I had, life was good and I had money in my pocket. But, just kind of want that, like I say, if you look close, you can, way off in the distance, you can see the little gun shooting back at him. But something in Jacksonville history hardly anybody knows about. And like I say, I can't find, Higginson in his book claims that it's the first ever duel between two railroad mounted guns.
Were they ever in range of each other?
Barely. Yeah, they were probably at maximum range on both of them. Okay, probably a mile and a half apart shooting each other. Now the Yankees said that the shell out of that Confederate gun was so big you could see it coming at them, big and slow, and that you could see it coming, you could run to the ditch on the other side of the plank road and jump in the ditch. That's what they said.
So, Larry, that would have been approximately between MacDuff and King Street then? On the
No,
tracks?
probably between MacDuff and Stockton.
Okay.
But you know where, yeah, I know where King Street is. That's probably right about the middle. Or this might be, the Union forces, they did get to the trestle there at 3 Mile Run.
Okay.
That's as far as they got. They claimed they tore up a half a mile of track. Confederates said they took one rail out, so maybe split the difference. But they immediately, as soon as the Confederates showed up, they started tracking back to Jackson. So they just never had enough manpower to get out into the countryside. They probably would have needed 2,500, 3,000 troops to maintain the post at Jacksonville and then go out into the countryside. They'd have at least 1,000-man unit to go out into the countryside and not get annihilated, and still run the risk of getting cut off.
Is there any count of the civilians? Is there any count of the civilians that had guns that were ready to fight?
No. Put out the call for them, but I guess all of them have done. That was going to volunteers, volunteered already. They had very little. I read nothing of anybody volunteering or coming in. There were a couple of men enlisted at Camp Moon while they were there, but they probably would have enlisted anyway.
Are there any more prints of the painting?
Do what?
Are there any more prints or copies of the painting?
Well, that was the idea, was to try and sell them, and I had 2 copies made, and just to see how they turned out. One's a little different than this one. I guess we could get some copies made of it. But, things changed. Yes, sir.
You mentioned Cracker Swamp Road. Where was that?
Cracker Swamp?
Yeah.
Cracker Swamp basically got eat up by 295. You know where Memorial Park Cemetery is? Out here on the west side of town. Normandy Boulevard and 295 area.
Yeah.
Just to the east of that was where Cracker Swamp started. That was the south end. That's why the Alligator Road Lenox Avenue is the Alligator Road, the old road out of Jacksonville. It dropped down to the south there to get around Cracker Swamp. And it runs all the way up. Actually, Plank Road cuts through a little tip of the Cracker Swamp on the north end. But they filled in a bunch of Cracker Swamp with 295 when they built 295. There was no houses in there because it was all swampland. But you can still see swamp over there on the right-hand side of 295 when you're going north.
There's a cracker swamp in East Palatka also. They didn't join up somewhere, did they?
No, sir. No, this is just, Mr. Jones, he was born in 1909 and grew up on the west side of town, and he always told me the story that Cracker Swamp, you know how it got its name? I said, no, I don't know how it got its name. He said, well, I understand during the Civil War that the Yankees abandoned a boxload of hardtack there, and that the Confederates come up, tried to get it, and the Yankees tried to take it back. They fought over that boxcar load of hardtack. That's why they call it Cracker Swamp. But I can find no reference to that at all. And prior to the war, they were calling it Cracker Swamp, so I couldn't believe his story.
Still a great story.
It was a good
Yeah, it
story. Well, I'll shut up if nobody's got no more questions.
I got one more.
Yes, sir, Cody.
So why is it that you said the Confederates never decided to put a garrison here in Jacksonville to keep the Union from invading again? Do you know why that was?
Couldn't, the gunboats were too strong. There was always a gunboat in the river. They always kept, Union forces always kept a gunboat up at Mayport. That's why when they come into Jacksonville, the people in town said they were used to the gunboat about once a week coming down and going past Jacksonville. So when these ships approached that morning, they didn't really raise no alarm. They should have, because there was 5 of them, and not 1. But, you know, that's how they were able to just come in and take the town so quick. They don't explain where the Confederate pickets were at that were supposed to be watching town. Because in '64, when they came in, Confederate pickets fired into the boats at the wharves and killed a couple of people. Killed a landsman on one of the sailors on one of the steamers. But so they was probably still asleep or something and not doing their job. Now they did, after this occupation, Finnegan put up a signal tower here in Jacksonville to where he could signal down the railroad tracks with flags. And they had one out near Evergreen Cemetery that they could see, they could send flag signals to Jacksonville of a boat approaching. Then they could signal down the railroad to Camp Finnegan where they had telegraph to send out the alarm that was a boat approaching. But that summer, I think it was July or August, the gunboat come down and said he could clearly see the Confederates signaling the people in Jacksonville. So that night they took 2 launches up that creek there by Evergreen Cemetery we were at and captured all the signal station and the pickets because they were asleep. So, but they never didn't have the manpower to hold it, for one thing. They stayed out there west of town. They could picket the railroad, the Plank Road, and the Alligator Road all at the same time from their camp. And just made it easier on the Confederates because just too much power in the gunboats. I mean, we didn't have anything to drive. Even a light field battery wouldn't do nothing to the gunboat other than harass them.
This was one of them ironclad ones?
No. I don't know of ever being an ironclad in the St. Johns River.
Huh.
They were all pretty much open deck gunboats.
Okay.
Double masted with steam engines in them. Some of them were side wheelers, some of them were propellers. The Norwich and the Uncas were the 2 that were on this occupation. Norwich is the one that came up and bottled up the creek out here, bottled up McGurk's Creek, which we call Ortega River today, and trapped the St. Mary's up there in Cedar Creek.
How big were the guns on the Union gunboats?
Anywhere from 100-pounder down, 100-pound Parrott. We used to have one at one time in here. I don't see it anymore. We had a 100-pound Parrott at one time here. I don't know where it went to.
Larry, where do they bury the Union soldiers that
I
were
don't
killed?
know. I do not know where they buried them. Probably somebody's flower garden now.
Probably shoved them underneath those planks.
Maybe. They hauled, they took them all back to town whenever they had casualties. They accused Confederates of the same thing, of hauling off all their dead and wounded, you know. And both sides exaggerated bad the number that they, and casualties they inflicted on the other.
Because I don't remember seeing any in Old City Cemetery that you would have thought that's where they would have buried him in the,
It was there.
yeah, it was there.
What's the guy's name that got killed at St. John's Bluff? The major?
Fell on the bayonet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I forgot his name. I mean, that was the only true Confederate burial there at Old City. I mean, Confederate soldiers were there when they buried him.
He fell out of a tree supposedly on the bayonet.
You know.
Kind of, it's always been a kind of a strange story.
Yeah, that private just happened to,
Yeah.
he didn't like that major. He put that bayonet out when he fell out of the tree.
Climb on into it.
Yeah. Trying to stop him from hitting the ground.
Is that the major that's buried outside the area? He's on his own little,
Now, he's buried in Old City right up there, kind of near the front in the middle, right? Isn't that what he's-
I'll have to look it up. I don't remember.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a, doesn't really, I mean, it's a Confederate headstone. He's got a headstone because I think we got him one. But, I mean, there's nothing there saying anything other than the date shows he died during the war.
Well, I'll shut up.
thank you, Larry.
All right, appreciate that, Larry. That's excellent. You want to stand up and Chuck say a prayer, shut us down. Appreciate everybody coming.
Heavenly Father, thank you for this speaker that brought us tonight. Bless him, keep educating him so he might come back and give us another lesson. I want to thank you for the Mother's Day that we had this past Sunday, for all of our mothers. God bless all of them. We ask this all in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
You're gonna try to come Saturday?
Yeah, I think.